Thank you everybody for coming today. We got a good full house here, which is great. I'm going to be talking about some of the mysteries of the ancient world that the Templars discovered clear back in the 1100s and 1200s. They tried to preserve it as best they can, and much of this knowledge is something that has come down to us today, and it's directly related to some of the UAP stuff that's happening at this time, which you wouldn't think that they would be connected necessarily, but they absolutely are. So this will be an interesting conversation. So just to give you a little background of the Knights Templar, I'm not going to get into all the profane history that you can read about anywhere. But basically, the Templar Order was actually secretly founded as early as 1096, and it was founded by certain families that had come from what are known as Gnostic families, and what these were, they were traditions that were passing on the Gnostic mystery school tradition. And when I say Gnostic, it's kind of the opposite of agnostic, right? So agnostic means to not know. Gnostic means to know, right? But it's a direct, personal, experiential knowledge from a higher source. So it's what the Eastern tradition would refer to as enlightenment or nirvana. The Western tradition referred to as gnosis. This is where this term came from. And there were certain Gnostic schools that had existed all over Europe, Middle East, Africa, that were preserving a means of initiation where people could experience something that they hadn't experienced before. To give you an example, for example, if a person were to go through an initiation rite that caused them to have an out-of-body experience, once they had that out-of-body experience, they knew from that moment forward that there was a part of them that survived beyond the body, right? So they were no longer afraid of death, right? Because they knew it. They had gone through the experience. And they knew that consciousness was something that transcended just our physical forms, right? Beyond that, these Gnostic traditions also taught that we are living in a consciousness field. Everything is, the way I like to say it is all consciousness consciously becoming more conscious. Right? And that's what we're in. We're in this field of consciousness. Oftentimes when we look at UAP activity in particular, they seem to have some sort of a consciousness technology interface, right? Where through certain exercises, people and traditions and cultures have actually been able to bring these UAPs in throughout history. But I mean, it implies that there's, whether you're looking at another dimension or another a part of space-time, they're being attracted to the people that are attracting them, right? Which implies we're living in a consciousness field. And this is something that modern scientists tell us. Some of the greatest physicists throughout history have said, it's all mind. It's all, the universe acts like one big mind. And this is something the Gnostics believed in. But even to the point that they said, look, we have our individual consciousnesses, and we develop a persona around that. But we're all tied into a universal consciousness that we're all connected to. And we're all connected to each other. And that's the only way that technology would work amongst these UAPs. Well, so the Templars, they were coming out of this tradition, and part of this tradition suggested that there had been a previous civilization, a very advanced civilization, perhaps even more advanced than we are today, that had collapsed. And this is some of the younger Dryas impact ideas that you see people like Graham Hancock and others talking about. But at the time, the Templars, they didn't have a word for younger Dryas or anything like that. They were looking at texts, ancient texts. And they were looking at the works of Plato. They were looking there were certain groups in the Middle East, Gnostic groups like the Druze, who are also known as the Tahib Muhadun. They were translating these Greek texts. And then they were looking to the Bible, which, told the story of a civilization prior to the flood associated with Noah. And they believed from their own tradition, of their Gnostic families that they came from, that that this previous civilization had collapsed, but there were pockets of survival in different parts of the world that were passing on the technology, or trying to preserve remnants of the technology, trying to preserve the philosophy, and trying to preserve the history of what that was. And so really, the Templar order was founded to seek out these pockets and to try to find this technology and this understanding and to bring it back into Europe to create the Renaissance, which is what they did. Not all of what they discovered was revealed to the public yet, because at the time, and we're talking the 1100s now, Europe was ruled by the church and the monarchies. And oftentimes the monarchies were ruled by the church. So it was a very confined system. And some of the things that the Templars began to discover in their travels did not fit within the paradigm of the day. So what do you do with it? They just tried to preserve it. So most people learn the story of how the Templars went down into Jerusalem. They swore to protect the pilgrims of the Holy Land, which they did. And when I say pilgrims of the Holy Land, I mean not just Roman Catholic Christians. They were protecting people of all faiths. They were literally, they got in fights with other crusading orders because they would be protecting Muslims, or they would be protecting Jews. They would be protecting Coptic Christians, that weren't in line with the establishment. They recognized that the divine spark is within all of us, right? They were coming from this Gnostic perspective that, look, we are all connected through this sea of consciousness. We just are a little lost as a society because there are what they refer to as archons, or rulers, that keep us enslaved here until we wake up enough to the point where they let us move on to the next sphere of awareness, whatever that is. But that it was the job, quite literally, of the order to try to help wake people up, right? That was its job. And if people weren't ready to be woken up, to at least preserve the knowledge to a time when people were ready. So with that said, one of the things that the Templars did is they went to Jerusalem. They found all kinds of cool artifacts there. That's a different lecture. But one of the places they also went to was Egypt. And they were particularly looking for artifacts between the region of Giza and Saqqara, which is about a 30, 40-mile area. And I'm going to tell you right now, and I'm going to show you some of this, so don't take my word for it. There are tunnels all under that area. And in those tunnels, there is evidence of this previous civilization, at least the technology being applied from that civilization. In ancient Egypt, that area was known as Ras Tau. That was the name in Egyptian. Well, Ras Tau in Latin, from which the Templars were used to working in, actually Ras means rose and Tau means cross. Right? So they adopted the symbol of the rose cross as kind of like a secret homage or map to this particular region where they were digging in. One of the things they also were doing is they were performing initiations in the Great Pyramid. Now many of you will say, well, the Great Pyramid wasn't broken into till 700 years ago, by the Caliphate at the time. How were the Templars doing initiations in there over 1,000 years ago? Well, I'll tell you a secret. There are tunnels that go under the Giza Plateau to the Great Pyramid. And they lead to what's known as the grotto, which is the subterranean chamber of the Great Pyramid. And what happened is the Caliphate made their way through these tunnels, and they also got into the Great Pyramid. And they broke out of it. They didn't break into it, as history teaches. That's the reason why they happened to break out at just the perfect spot where the old entrance was that had been sealed up. So, and the proof of this is there's Templar graffiti in the Great Pyramid on the sarcophagus. You'll find an alpha and an omega carved on this sarcophagus here. It's on the other side, but it's there. And Templars have been performing initiations in there ever since. So these are some kind of modern images suggesting such a thing. So,
how do we know it's aliens? Couldn't that just be military aircraft? They now believe there's one planet for every star in the universe. There are already 8.4 billion artificial intelligence systems. Who could have built that 10,000 years ago? Where did you find the source for that? Could AI truly become sentient?
For a unique, in-depth, and rational look at these topics with the world's leading experts, check out Beyond Contact on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts. Find us at contactinthedesert.com.